Dana Denha here, and this is Let's Watch with the Ann Arbor Film Festival. March brings the arts to screens and gallery spaces in A2 thanks to the hard work and dedication of the Ann Arbor Film Festival. The downtown becomes a destination for creatives from all over the world to share their insights through the arts and be inspired by others. Joining me is Paul Echeverria, a multimedia artist and educator with work off the screen at the Ann Arbor Art Center and a special presentation at the Michigan Theater during the 63rd Annual Ann Arbor Film Festival. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hi, Dana. Thanks for having me. This is quite an honor, so I really value being here.
Well, we were discussing before we started this interview that we are both associated with Wayne State. I love talking to people from Wayne State because I actually feel like when I left Wayne State, it was something that I missed for a while. And I don't know if that's like a common feeling or not.
Sure. Well, I came back to Michigan after I was born in Ann Arbor, and we ended up leaving the state when I was very young, and ended up going through college, starting my career, and then I was hired at Wayne State to come home, basically. And so to come home and to be able to work in Detroit and in Michigan again is quite a exhilarating feeling. And so it feels very much like a homecoming. And to connect with others who are in that network, it makes it even more special.
It's amazing how Ann Arbor just draws people back in. And were you so young at the time when you lived in Ann Arbor that you didn't really get to experience a film festival when you were younger?
Yeah, so the first time, I had applied to the festival pretty early on, I would say 98, 99, initially when they were first doing 16 millimeter only. And then the first time, I actually had a friend, Joey Huertas, who had screened at the festival prior and highly recommended it. And it was on my to-do list for such a long time that, oh, I got to get to Ann Arbor. It's my hometown festival. And then finally made it, I want to say 2008, 2009, thereabouts, got to come out and, you know, the first instinct or the first experience was walking into the Michigan Theater and, walking into the main auditorium and seeing Thorsten Fleisch's Energy play. I don't know if viewers remember that film. And then just, like a house of a thousand film enthusiasts just go nuts at the end, just like, yeah. And I was like, wow, I've never seen this for experimental cinema. So immediately fell in love.
Yeah, one of the amazing things about the film festival is that it does sort of lift that veil of experimental film for a larger audience because I think without festivals like Ann Arbor's, most people would never see these films and like get inspired. And I actually think like the way mainstream films are sort of going to be evolving over time will be more like experimental films.
Yeah, so the one thing that, I studied undergrad in New York and I studied graduate out west more or less, and they have their circles of the film industry, LA, New York, etc. And you really kind of come to think that those areas are the preeminent areas for filmmaking. But when you think about experimental cinema and you look at the region, it's a very, very strong region that we have with Ann Arbor Film Festival, the longest running experimental film festival in North America. But then also you have pockets in Chicago, Milwaukee, Buffalo, Ohio. And so there's a very rich and fertile area for experimental film. And so that's what's really exciting about it as well is you would, your mind when you think experimental film would immediately go, oh, New York or somewhere else. But in this case, I think the Midwest, you put that up there and it matches just as well. So
We all know, you and I, that Ann Arbor is a great destination. So, like, it's more than just the film festival. If you're coming from somewhere else and you're visiting Ann Arbor for the film festival, you get to enjoy our vibrant downtown, do a lot of fun activities. You get to eat the amazing food we have. So, it's like a win-win all around.
yeah, absolutely. Like I can never stop saying nice things about Ann Arbor, and it always felt like home. I never lost that, even though I left very early on. Um, some of the stories that I like to tell, my parents, they met in the Michigan Union for the first time, and so their love story unfolded in Ann Arbor, and my dad played in the marching band there and went to the university, and then my mom actually arrived from Venezuela when she was 17 years old, and that essentially she tells me like, oh, I learned how to speak English by going to the Michigan Theater and the State Theater and watching movies. And so it's those types of things where you're like, oh yeah, this is where I belong, this is a piece of me. So
Well, tell me about you. How did you get into filmmaking? What was that spark that made you want to be a filmmaker?
well, I always had an interest in making films as long as I can remember, and I know it's a pretty early kind of illuminating instance because I can remember watching a film and it clicking at a very early age, watching a film and clicking like, oh, this is something I'd like to do. And I remember having a conversation with my dad. He's like, oh, have you ever thought about what you want to do when you're older? And I said, well, yeah, Dad, I want to fly. And he was like, oh, like an airplane? And I was like, no, I want to fly like a bird with wings. And and he was like, well, you can't do that. And I said, yeah. So I think as a backup, I want to make films. And so that's just hints at how young I was. Like it was either fly with my arms like a bird or make films. And so that interest just held on throughout the years. As I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this. We moved because my parents divorced. So I was about 8 years old. My mother and I actually moved to South Florida, and I spent pretty much most of my youth there, while still maintaining some Michigan connections. But I held on to that love for film. It was a substantial goal to make it to film school. I eventually ended up going to a film school in New York called SUNY Purchase, part of the SUNY system, and just really had a good experience there where not only was I immersed into my love for filmmaking, but also became more aware of documentary filmmaking, became more aware of experimental filmmaking, and was really able to kind of put those together to form a really nice foundation and to move forward with this dream and make sure that I was still kind of following it even after I had graduated. So.
Yeah, I can attest to film is a weird degree that I feel like some people sort of peter out after they get their degree. It's like a hard, it's a hard to get a job or make a living, and then they find something else. But like really, if you can get that job and keep it, and it's really like a happy place you can be. You know what I mean? Like to have a job that you love and you're passionate about, and you get to be creative.
Yeah, well, that's something as well as I started learning film we were the first class to shoot 16 millimeter instead of Super 8. And so we were really like, we felt honored, like, oh, we're special. Look, we get to
Yeah.
shoot our 16 millimeter. And then by the time I was a senior, it was actually the year after I left, the Avid was introduced into the workflow. So we were cutting our films on Steenbecks and Moviolas and, doing splices, really, the tactile approach to film, right before, just a shade before all the digital workflows entered. And so I left kind of not acquiring the digital skills that I need
Yeah.
in the modern film industry, but definitely kind of acquiring those after the fact and having this one foot in the newer technology, one foot in the more traditional technology, and essentially after graduating, I moved back to Florida and started working in the film industry there, primarily in a rental house, but also as a camera assistant. And yeah, I think, like you said, it's difficult to craft a career for yourself in the film industry. I think the one thing that changed for me is I discovered teaching, and I discovered that, well, I'm happiest when I can teach film, in addition to making my own films. And so that was an instance where I was really, kind of opened up another pathway for my interest in film that, essentially wasn't there when I started. So,
I think there's also this amazing relationship that you can create with your students. I mean, I'm not a teacher, but I am
mhm,
thinking back to my time at Wayne State,
right.
and I had one teacher, I mean, he's since passed, but he meant so much to me, and he will mean so much to me my whole life. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like this inspiration that you can give people for their future.
Yeah, well, that's the plan, right? Is to not only kind of share this love of film, but also to kind of well, pay it back, I guess you could say. Like I have my own teachers and filmmakers who have influenced me, and I'm still trying to satisfy the dream, if you will, and that's how I refer to it, right? To pursue the dream, and so I think about that, and hopefully uh, that by pursuing that, I can inspire others and my students to kind of do the same. And so that's all definitely the plan looking ahead, right? Is that you can share in that passion for filmmaking, but also share that idea of, look, yeah, there is a dream out there and you can capture it in your own way. So
Tell me about what you do at Wayne State and how that sort of coincides with the artwork that you create.
sure. Well, I teach in the film area, the Department of Communication, specifically in the film area. And I was hired as part of a digital art and media track, which they were trying to introduce more digital media and interactive media into the curriculum. And so I came in and started teaching a digital screen media course where we experiment with technologies outside of traditional cinema, like 3D video. We did AR previously. This semester, we're doing AI films. So it's the type of thing where you're kind of looking into the future and seeing how will cinema evolve. But I also teach traditional production courses, intro to film, cinematography, things like that. And so it's the type of thing where I definitely have found a home where you have your classes, but also there's these just instances with the students where you just talk movies and you're like, "Oh, hey, have you seen this movie?" And there's a light that comes on when you have those conversations. And so that's something that I've really come to appreciate. And especially at Wayne, I find that there's a lot of film students who are still very passionate about movie making, even though it has evolved post-COVID, if you will. Even though it's evolved, there's still a very consistent passion for filmmaking, and not just to view films, but also to make them. So
I love that. It actually reminds me of my time at Wayne State and the professor I spoke of, Joel Silvers. He
yeah.
used to every at the beginning of every class, we'd always talk about like films we had watched recently, and then we'd all
Oh,
discuss like
good.
recent films. So I think that's a lovely. I love that.
That's great. I never got to meet Joel, but obviously I've heard of him and the influence he had on the program and his students. And
He
so
really was an amazing artist.
yeah, that's wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things or the main thing that you're talking about or showing at the Ann Arbor Film Festival this year is this Luther Price stuff. Am I right? Luther Price? I don't
Yeah.
know who Luther Price is. Can you tell me about him?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll go back to my introduction to Luther was actually during the Whitney Biennial in 2012, and at the time I was a graduate student at the University of Colorado Boulder, and they had to release their fall schedule of artists who would be visiting us, and one of the artists for that fall was Luther Price, and so. I went to the biennial knowing that he had a work installed there. And, if you've ever been to the biennial, there's like a lot of new, elaborate kind of sculptural works that are really at the vanguard of the art world. And what struck me about Luther's piece when I found it is it was this simple slide projector on a pedestal. screening handcrafted images. And so, there was this simplicity to the slide projector, and there was this experimentation happening in the slides that was quite fascinating because it's this mix of kind of traditional technology with the handcrafted aspect of filmmaking. And so I saw the slides and I was really excited by the work, inspired by the work, and knew that I would be meeting Luther in a couple months. And I was like, this is great. Like I had a chance to see his work prior to his visit in Boulder. And then Luther came to Boulder in that during that fall of 2012, and I was one assigned as one of his graduate hosts. So I was to kind of make sure that he got to his hotel, got to the places where he was screening and such. And we just hit it off right off the bat. There were quite basically I was able to spend r roughly 100 hours, which is the title of the work. And essentially we were able I was able to kind of get to know him. We were able to talk a lot. We had multiple instances where we were just kind of sitting, talking about life, talking about making art, wide range of topics. And so that was really a memorable experience, and something that I cherished. And then after the fact, and this is where it's rare, in terms of interacting with a visiting artist, we stayed in touch. We had email contact, and we went back and forth, and um, shared emails, did check-ins, even at one point talked about maybe collaborating on a piece, and which never came to fruition. But the idea there is that throughout this process of initially seeing his work, meeting him, and then interacting with him after his visit, it was just something where I said, this is really quite valuable, and I want to bring this into some type of form, right? Into some type of project where I can display how inspirational this was. And so, How's It Hanging? 100 Hours with LP is the work that came out of that. And I'll just mention How's It Hanging is actually the the title of one of his emails, which I found really kind of quite original and unique. His writing style, on my website, you can see one of his emails. It's basically like all caps with period,
Oh,
period,
I
period.
looked at
Yeah,
it.
like that's Luther. That's an email from Luther, and the email itself kind of has this like artistic quality to it, and this
I
free
know. I
form.
was like, when I was looking at the email and reading it, which it's like sort of hard to read because of the way it's written, you know what I mean? Like just
Right.
like the capitals and all the periods and stuff like that. But I was like, this has got to be one of the most creative minds to be doing it. I
Sure.
mean, it says something about him.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the emails, provide well the personal memories, and then the emails provided the source material for the piece. And yeah, those emails are gold. I mean, the way that his stream of thoughts, there's humor in them. There's there's intimacy. There's authenticity, genuineness, and you really feel like, wow, this is really interesting. And then, you go and read other emails. Like there's a few, like at least one interview online where you look, and he did the interview in that style. Like all of his emails were in that style. And what it shows is kind of the uniqueness of Luther, and what he brought to those interactions, was something quite original. And so to be able to capture that was something that I wanted to do with this piece.
Well, it's interesting that you say you always wanted to collaborate with him, but it's as if you're collaborating with him posthumously now.
Yeah, sure. So, he had mentioned at one point in one of the emails, "Hey, we should work on a film together," or something like that. And that my initial reaction was like, "Oh gosh, Luther wants to work with me. Of course, I want to work with." And then, the way it goes with emails, you let a month or two pass, and then you check in, and so I had sent him some handmade film clips that I had done, and he had thanked me for those. But as the years went on, we emailed less, and but sadly he passed away in 2020 when I was actually living in Connecticut at the time and was very, very spatially close or close geographically. And I think our last email exchange was around 2017. So it was the type of thing where we fell out of touch, and then to sit back and reflect after he had passed, I was like, I'd really like to take these interactions, take these memories, take these emails, and see if I can work that into something. And so, the How's It Hanging piece was the result of that.
And that's what we'll see at the Ann Arbor Art Center.
Correct. Yeah. So what it is it's basically a slide projector with handcrafted slides that I made, very similar to Luther's workflow. And the one thing I'll say about Luther's workflow is that he taught handmade film. That was one of the classes that he taught at MassArt, and he was very enthusiastic about that process and sharing his techniques. And so in a way, it was the type of thing where basically I used all our the stories that he had told me, the techniques, bearing film, using bleach, using materials to kind of create a sculptural version of the image. And I made my own versions of that with my own content, right? And my own materials. And so, in that sense, it's inspiring as well, because he made a lasting influence in person, but now I can also kind of explore with some of the techniques that he taught and that he recommended, and kind of find my own path. And I have to say, like it is, if you haven't done like handmade films before, it does put you in a new mindset creatively, where there's a tactility, there's an experimentation, there's a revelation you have with the work, and in this case, it's looking at a still slide that is quite impactful and quite memorable in terms of what it produces. And I found that it was encouraging me to make more, right? And that when I hit that flow, it was like, oh, I love this. I want to keep doing it, and I want to keep experimenting, and I want to keep trying new versions of these slides. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at with the work. And so you'll get to see the simplicity of the slide projector with the handcrafted images, and then also there's audio, which retells some of the stories that we experienced during the visit, and readings of the emails.
The way you talk about this process, it makes me think about like when you really get into creating something and it's like your brain can't stop thinking about it, and like you close your eyes and you see it and you're like in bed sleeping and you're seeing it and it just like takes over your mindset.
Oh, sure. Well, you can tell. It's funny you say you're in bed thinking about it, because it's like you can tell you're really invested in a creative project when you start dreaming about it or having those ideas like mid-sleep, right?
Oh my God.
Like,
And then you're like,
this
I
is
need a
it,
notebook
right?
by my bed.
Yeah, yeah. So that's when you know that, oh, this is making its mark. And so, with Luther, the slide projection represents an interesting part in his career. He was making camera-based films for a large portion of his career, and then he had a very unique family experience where three members of his family basically died from cancer, and he calls it his autobiographical period. And he said basically he had to get away from that, from the films being so close. And so he reverted into found footage, still making projectable films, but also the slide projector, handcrafted images, static images as an extension of his practice. And he said that, I can still talk about things about that are personal, autobiographical, but it doesn't feel as close.
Yeah,
And
because I did read a little. I didn't know who he was prior to this interview, but I read a little bit
yeah,
about, and yes, a lot of his work was about his family and the relationships in his family prior
correct.
to this
Yeah.
situation. Well, you also have a special presentation at the Michigan Theater, 6 films. by Luther Price. So tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that program as well. It's titled "Scream It Out of You," which was his advice to me in one of the letters that he wrote me, one of the emails, where he said, "If you really want to make good work, you have to scream it out of you." And I can't think of any filmmaker more appropriate to title a program "Scream It Out of You" than Luther, because his films are quite an experience. They're definitely something that uh, when I experienced them for the first time, I had seen a lot of experimental films at that point, but there's something unique about them, right? And that's not always easy to find anymore, right? To find an original voice or someone who is doing something with the medium that's unique and groundbreaking, really is what it was. And so we'll be showing 6 films by Luther, and it should be a good program. These are films that we tried to find films that weren't screened in the past and that have that really rare quality. And so if you're into rare experimental films, this would be definitely one to put on your calendar and come and join us and pay tribute to Luther and his work.
Well, we are just about out of time, but before we go, I always like to ask people why you feel like people should check out the film festival as an artist, a viewer, or just someone that's passing by, and walking through the city.
Yeah. Well, I would say if you've never been to the State Theater or the Michigan Theater, I think everything's back in the Michigan Theater this year. Um, it still is a cathedral of cinema. You still walk in there and feel not only that cinema is important in that moment in time, but that cinema has been important for the last 100 plus years, and you feel that impact and the importance of having a festival in a space like this. But then also the programming, the content. I think what it is it takes a new way of looking at films. This isn't just walking into your normal multiplex and watching a few films. Um, it is I don't know the exact slogan they use, but it's like transforming minds or bending minds. I think it was bending
Yes,
minds,
it's bending minds.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, bending minds. And that's something that I think is worth experiencing if you haven't before, to seeing what some of the new experiments are, to meet with the filmmakers, to meet members of the community and how passionate they are for the film festival, but also to, just acknowledge all the hard work that Leslie Raymond has done and her staff and how they're really succeeding at creating a venue and an event that pays tribute to not only cinema but also the community, and that really saves a seat for everyone at the table to come and take part in this experience.
Well, thank you, Paul, so much. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you, Dana. Pleasure.
To watch this and other CTN series, visit youtube.com/CTN Ann Arbor. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dana Denha for Let's Watch with the Ann Arbor Film Festival.